Our next presenter is Luiz Lima. He was born in Rio de Janeiro, Brazil. In 1999, he moved to the United States, where he then came in contact with Spiritism, just a few years after that. He has been lecturing on Spiritism in both English and Portuguese. Luiz is also a member of the Kardec Spirit Renovation Spiritist Center in Coconut Creek, Florida. Luiz holds a bachelor's degree in engineering and currently works in the computer network business. Luiz will be presenting the topic, cloning and its spiritual implications. Let us help welcome Luiz Lima.
Thank you very much. What a great duo we had here. And I was just thinking, we had two great guys, and we have two microphones, and the subject is cloning. So if you're waiting for a second Luiz Lima, it's not going to happen, okay? Okay, this is a very, very, very serious subject. The reason being, we're dealing directly with lives. And we cannot even bring this into the light, under the light of Spiritism. If we don't know what goes on technically, a little bit of technical information, we need to be able to determine what exactly is the crossover between this and Spiritism. A lot of it has to do with misinformation in general. In our society, when we say cloning, we think of a copy machine. You put somebody on one side, somebody else comes on the other side. That's not it. And that's part of the problem. It's not well understood. So even a spiritist, in order to be able to do something with the subject and understand it, we need to go through some very basic technical information on it. Cloning is used for a lot of things. We're only interested, which can be grouped in two types. It's what we call natural cloning and artificial cloning. Natural cloning are twins. Okay? Artificial cloning is what the hype is all about. Okay? That's what we need to understand a little bit. On the natural cloning, which is the case of the twins, they have exactly the same genetic code because they are formed of the same one basic cell. So there is absolutely no difference whatsoever in these physical identities. The genetic code is exactly the same. Artificial cloning is different. First of all, it's a complicated subject to talk about. Most people avoid it. It's very controversial. It's very controversial because it has to do with ethics and bioethics. We're going to cover this a little bit later on. And I want to show you, after we discuss this then, what is the Spiritist point of view. That's where we want to get. So we need to understand what goes behind the scenes here. So let's say I want to clone somebody. When I mean somebody, it's not necessarily the person. It could be muscle cells on this person, liver cells on this person. For lack of a better word, to make it simple, let's just call cloning this person. We call this the patient. So what we do is we take a cell out of this person's body, and we take the nucleus out of this cell. The cell is composed of two parts, the cytoplasm and the nucleus inside. When I took the nucleus out, what's left is the cytoplasm. So we set this aside. Then we go and pick up a virgin egg from a fertile woman and do the same thing. We separate cytoplasm and nucleus, but then what we do is we take the nucleus from the person we want to clone, and we insert this into the cytoplasm, or the nucleusless cell of the fertile woman. If things go right, they fail a lot. That's why science hasn't been successful enough. We're going to see why. But if things go right, the process is going to go ahead, and this is going to fertilize, and one cell becomes 2, 4, 8, 16, and so forth. And it's what we call a blastocyst. The name is not important to us, but it's what we call a blastocyst. And then we need to understand these things a little bit. I said if the process goes right, we're not. So there's something that makes the process happen, we're not. And we're missing that today in our studies, in our science, and all of that. So what we need to do is detail a little bit 3 parts of this scheme, okay? That part that we call removing the nucleus. We need to understand why we do that. We're going to talk about the blastocyst and that pump of energy, the fusion, when the 2 parts, the nucleus from one cell and the cytoplasm of the other, are put in together. So let's start by talking about the nucleus. Why do we have to do that? Why do we have to remove the nucleus and put another one in? Because if I want to clone something, I need to guarantee 100% that the genetic code of the new forming cell is exactly the same as the original cell. Now, if we were going to have a regular egg and sperm fertilization, the chances that I'm going to get the right genetic code are minimal, if any. So I need to be able to work on the genetic code. Like I said, the cell has 2 parts, the cytoplasm and the nucleus inside. The nucleus, as you see right here on the picture, it contains the chromosomes. The chromosomes are, if you will, to make it easier for us to understand, just think about 2 tapes, and we make a twisted pair out of these 2 tapes. Parts of these tapes are genes. So in order for me to guarantee that these genes are all the same, I need to be able to do the cloning. Genes are switches, on and off, on and off, on and off, okay? We have 23 chromosomes, each one formed by a string of genes. So I got 23 from the father, 23 from the mother. That will give us about roughly 25,000 genes. That's what we have. It is impossible, by chance, if you will, by selecting an egg and a sperm and letting the process happen by itself, it's very unlikely that I'm going to hit the exact 25,000 combination. So that's why we need to remove the nucleus and insert the nucleus with the code already in it, instead of just taking the chance to make it happen by itself, if you will. Now, one of the other parts in the process that we call is how this blastocyst is formed. It all starts with 1 cell. It goes to 2, 4, 8, 16, and so forth. When it gets to about 100 cells, that's when we call a blastocyst. This thing takes about 4 to 5 days roughly to be formed. And for the materialistic science, this is the gold mine. Because the blastocyst is already in its embryonic state, and it contains what they call stem cells. Stem cells are cells that can be transformed or forced to be transformed into any kind of cell. So if I want to make liver cells, I can start with these cells here, these stem cells. If I want to make heart cells, I can start here and drive the process through, provided that we are able to technically, okay? So how can I get these stem cells? They can come from 2 sources, what we call adult cells and embryonic cells. Adult cells are cells already formed in our bodies, like child and adult, as we call. An adult has already its own personality, mind, and so forth. And adult cells can only be duplicated into the same type of cells. Liver cells can only generate liver cells. Heart cells can only generate heart cells. Kidney cells can only generate kidney cells. That's it. Now, embryonic cells is, like I said a moment ago, is the gold mine for materialistic science, because I can take one of these and turn into anything different. Turn into kidney cells and, like the picture here, some liver cells, heart cells, muscle cells, skin cells. So for the science, they want the cells. There's a bioethic here that needs to be worked on, but they want the cells. Embryonic cells can be achieved by taking them off an embryo. When I do that, I destroy the embryo. Destroying the embryo has consequences. We're going to discuss a little bit. We're just talking about the technical aspect of the process right now. Adult cells can be taken from the bone marrow and the umbilical cord. That's interesting because on newborn babies now, they offer the option to save some of these cells from the umbilical cord that, if ever needed, they can be they get frozen and they can be used later on the same person without any damage to any embryos whatsoever. Okay, so that's the idea besides behind the adult cells taken to frozen cell umbilical. Okay. Now, another part of the process is the fusion of energy, that shot of energy. What is that for? We know that from the book Missionaries of the Light, which is almost like a treaty of genetics. Okay, this book is it was published in 1945. In 1953, we found out about the structure of the DNA. So that book comes before that, and it has so much information on genetics and how it works and a lot of different things. We're going to briefly touch more about this book throughout the presentation. But what it says is, first of all, there's a selection of the sperm. Okay. After that, the natural fertilization process is going to make it happen depending on a few things. When it happens, okay, what takes place is a fluid connection from the incarnating spirit. Okay, attaches the spirit to that one cell at conception. So the spirit attaches to this one cell at conception. Okay, that's a very important thing for us. And that's on the Genesis, where Allan Kardec tells us about the irresistible forces. That's the expression he uses, that will bind the spirit into the matter. The cell is matter as we know it. Okay? And from then on, the process will start. Now, this is natural fertilization. Artificial fertilization is different. We pump the nucleus into the cytoplasm of another cell, and then we put this shot of energy. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't. Now, what makes it work and what makes it not work? If it works, then there's a spirit attached, like we've seen cloned animals and all of that. Okay? If it works, there is a spirit attached. But how come there is no mother and father? Nothing like this. Okay, it's all virtual, literally. Okay, and we know from mediumistic revelations that the father and the mother magnetism is what's going to make it happen. And if you look into quantum physics today, all these studies prove through this theorem of Bell that correlated atoms will act. When one acts, the other does too. So magnetism between father and mother and the incarnating spirit is something that can happen. It is not subject to the laws of time and space. And that's pure quantum physics. That's not spiritism, that's science. Okay? So that's why at times it happens, at times it doesn't. So it is not up to science to determine this one is going to happen, this one will not. Otherwise, they would all go through properly. Okay? All right, so we got this mind gold, as I said, this blastocyst. And from here, two things can happen. We can take this group of cells into a lab, okay, and just make them generate cells for different organs and parts of the body. That's one thing. The other thing we can do is take this blastocyst, this embryo, and put it back on uterus, and if everything goes right, we're going to have a baby at the end of the process. Now, on the top part here, when we take this to a lab, that's what we call a therapeutic cloning. That is used for organ repairs and in medicine and regeneration of damaged tissue and things like that. The bottom part here of the drawing is associated with reproductive cloning. Okay? In terms of spiritual words, in spiritual words, therapeutic cloning is more associated, it resembles what would be a world of regeneration where we have less diseases, if no diseases at all. That would be ideal. And the bottom part, reproductive cloning, is associated with free will. And that's a problem, because free will is always a problem when used the wrong way. Okay? So, in either situation, the problem still remains, is the blastocyst. Whatever I do, top drawing, bottom drawing, it doesn't matter. I'm destroying the embryo. I'm destroying the blastocyst. So, that's not good. It's not good at all. And then we're going to have to understand the spirituality behind this thing. This is all technical. This is just the process. Now let's talk Spiritism here. Let's bring this thing under the light of Spiritism. So we're going to analyze this divided in 3 parts. First is before I go to the lab and decide to work on the project. That's before. So I haven't done anything. I'm just thinking. I'm just putting my project together. During the process, while this is happening on the lab, and after the process, meaning the results. So we're going to analyze this under these 3 umbrellas. Okay? So number 1, bioethics. This has created a lot of problems. In our society, different countries have different views because different people have different views. Different professionals have different views. And it all starts with this question: where does life begin? We do not have an answer, a universal answer. We Spiritists have one answer. Different segments of different religions have other answers. So there is no consensus. We know what it means. Life starts, as we know, incarnate life starts at conception. So if there was a fertilized egg, there could be life in there. We have no means to determine today. We do not have the technology to go into this one cell or egg, fertilized egg, and see if there's a spirit attached. We just don't have that ability today. Second problem, handling embryos. How do we see this in terms of ethics? Well, here's what Kardec tells us in Spirit's book, one of the 5 basic books of the Spiritism. It is a transgression, all right, of the law of God. It is a crime. Every transaction is a crime. So if I'm touching an embryo that has a spirit attached, and I don't know but if there's one, and I destroy that embryo, I am interfering. I am doing a transgression. This is a crime. That's God's law. Number 3, when the fertilization takes place, which is the moment of conception, when the spirit attaches itself to it, okay, we have no way to determine if there's a spirit in there. So we don't want to take the chance. We shouldn't even touch that embryo because we could be doing number 2 here. We could be going against God's laws. So we shouldn't be doing this. Number 4, a lot of times we take these embryos and we freeze them for a number of years for future use. What is the problem? We could have a spirit attached. And if we do, we're going to have consequences. I'm going to talk about this a little bit more, but we could have consequences. And finally, life is God's attribute. It's not up to us to determine how life starts and how life ends. We shouldn't be doing this. This is God's attribute. So anything we do in the contrary, we are interfering. And that's going to, have a consequence. That was all about the before, when I'm thinking of going to the lab. That's the bioethics before it starts. Second is during the process itself. I said we take the nucleus out of the cell, and what's left is the cytoplasm, okay? Now, if you think about the scientific part, okay, the genetic material in the cytoplasm of one cell is not the same on the other. One cell is the patient, the other cell is the fertile woman that's going to give her egg. The genetic cytoplasm is not the same. And then we fall into a very interesting thing. What commands the cell? This is in the Missionaries of the Light. By the way, we had the book out here for sale, I saw it. But that's what André Luiz, the spirit author, tells us. The action of the perispirit on the cell is not on the nucleus, it's on the cytoplasm. And then we have a problem, because now the cytoplasm on the cell that I'm working on is the cytoplasm from somebody else. So, am I going to be able to control the process properly? We don't know, probably not. That's probably one of the reasons why it fails so much. And this, knowing about the cytoplasm being manipulated, if you will, by the perispirit, that's not into the scientific community yet. They haven't got there yet. So a lot of times they just don't know why it fails, okay? So another thing to consider, I talked about frozen embryos a little bit ago. Well, we know from the same book, Missionaries of the Light, that at fertilization, from the outer part of the egg, okay, when the sperm touches it, until it gets to the middle of it, okay, until the fertilization process really starts, it takes about 4 minutes, okay? From that time until what we call latent life, it takes another 15 minutes. So in 19 minutes, that would be 4 plus 15, okay? In about 19 minutes, we have, provided that a spirit is attached to that one cell, we have life in 19 minutes. When you take the, in a lab, when you take the cell, this cell, or this embryo to be frozen, they have to wait a few days. They have to wait between 2 and 8 days. Well, between 2 and 8 days is way more than 19 minutes. So if there was life in there, you're freezing that life, let's put it this way. And if you discard this thing later on, you're touching what you're not supposed to, because we are destroying life. Now, there are a few things that we can consider from the spiritual point of view. That could be something that the spirit itself will take as part of its karma or redemption or something like this. It is something we can consider, okay? The incarnating spirit has no control over the egg that goes in there. So it's like you're not giving free will. There are cases where incarnation is not really allowing you to have too much free will if you have to pay some debts. Okay, so it's something we should consider. Number 3, that shot of energy. How do we see that in terms of from the spiritual point of view? From the scientific point of view, I spoke a little bit about it. This is used to crank it up. It's just cranking it up. They put electrodes and try to get it going. From the spiritual side, it's different, because the fluidic connection that's going to attach the spirit to this one cell, it has to be there. The magnetism has to be there. We do not control that. We do not control this. This is outside our control as technical people or scientists or materialistic. It just doesn't matter. Okay? Another thing that we are finding out with all the cloned animals that partially successful results, they age too fast. So there is suspicion that the vital fluid could be the problem. When you start the clone, okay, it doesn't start with the full capacity, if you will, like a full tank of gas. It doesn't. It ages too fast. So we are suspecting that this could be the problem. And if that is the case, it has to do with the cytoplasm not having the same genetic material than the original one. And also, another thing is the cytoplasm contains something called mitochondria. And what this does is generate energy called ectoplasm. Ectoplasm is sort of energy that allows the spirit to come into matter and touch matter. That is the bridge between the spirit and this, and matter. And that could be part of the problem as well. Okay. Number 4, fortunately, embryonic cells, which are the golden mind, they're not working well. They're not giving the science the results they expected. And there's a very strong suspicion that because they do not follow what we want, because they can turn into anything. So it's more difficult to control. They can turn into different things. And because it's more difficult to control, the reproduction and duplication of these cells doesn't follow the order that it should. And then it becomes like a cancer kind of thing. The group of cells just duplicates and duplicates and duplicates, and it doesn't do it the proper way, so we can't control it. So fortunately, science has not been successful in using embryonic cells. So they are using adult cells now, which is a little better, and we're going to talk about this a little bit more. Okay, now the final part. I thought about my project, I went to the lab and I did it, and I'm going to see what I got. Okay? And first, early aging. We spoke about this a little bit. Okay? Most animals that have been cloned are not doing well. They have a bunch of diseases, and the diseases they have are degenerative diseases. They're usually associated with aging. So the thing is not working right. Okay? Number 2, on the therapeutic cloning, okay, we can look at it this way. From the science point of view, several hospitals have been able to use this thing from adult cells without using embryos, without killing embryos. In Brazil, since 2001, they have been successful in doing this. They are not using embryos. They're just doing cloning from regular adult cells, and they are being able to perform, the cloning work properly without touching lives. So that's where we wanted to get, and we're getting there. You see, we went through a lot of killing, a lot of, bioethical situations here, but we're getting some results, and we're getting away from killing embryos. We're not really in need to do that so much. We still do, a lot of scientists still do in most countries of the world. There is no control about that, but at least we see, light at the end of a tunnel, that life is going to be preserved altogether. I wanted to bring you some final thoughts here. This is a phrase from the book that I just mentioned, Missionaries of the Light, and this is what it says. The fetal modeling and the development of the embryo, okay, so the development of the embryo, obey natural physical laws, okay, in accordance with evolutionary or redemptive plans. So it obeys physical laws, but it's not under our control. The control comes from a different dimension. The control comes from the perispirit influencing the cytoplasm of the cells to make the process flow or not. Number 2 here, from the book In the Greater World, which is another book by Dr. Luiz, the Spirit author. Spirits inspire and follow the progress of science, and researchers do not realize the support provided by the laboratories of infinity. What this means in simple words is, when we go to the microscope, we don't see the spirit. So those people going by the microscope, they're not going to see this. Okay, and they miss it. And this has been out there since 1945. Number 3, free will. We spoke about this. Every time I perform free will and I touch lives and I do something that I shouldn't do it, it's not right. Now there's the other side. The spirit, the incarnating spirit, has free will as well. He can back off. He can just give up for whatever reason. So that's something that he has, the right to do. He's got free will as well. And the last thing here is the God's law. Every transgression is a crime. I spoke about this. A soul prevented from undergoing the trial of which the body thus destroyed was to have been the instrument. That means if we destroy an embryo which has some spirit attached to it, we are not allowing a certain spirit to go through its incarnation, its trial, its process of evolution. And I'm responsible for it. I'm just responsible for it. So cloning is an extremely serious subject, very, very serious subject. It is a very delicate thing to talk about. In Spiritism, we don't have a problem talking about that. We just don't. In other religious segments and other classes of social people, we all avoid it. They all avoid it. And we ask ourselves, why is that? Why are we not so afraid of it? Answer, because we know life and we see life in a completely different way. From the top, spirit, down to the biology. They see it the other way around, from biology up to the mental state, and it stops right there. So our vision of life is not the same as theirs. It's completely different. And then we think about this. In 1945, we have this book out that mostly answers all these questions. Not only this, but the Spirit's books has a set of questions, 354, 5, 6, and 7. It touches that, and it answers these questions. The Spirit's book was written in 1857. And then we say, wow, we had the answers before we even had the questions. Isn't that so beautiful in Spiritism? Isn't that so great? Don't you feel so lucky? Thank you very much.